So let's get to this part about now the core of the session of doing the remediation work, of what we do, what's going to be expected inside service-provided operators, all right? So remediating violated customers. And again, I'm of the camp that I'm not the public health. So if somebody who is in the public health camp, they'd say infected customers, right? They use, you're infected. I'm in the economic side, the criminal side, so I like using violated customers. It's a victim of crime. Both of them work out, all right? So you're going to find, some of my peers like to use the public health model. I like to use the economic model with it. So our cyber civic society is going to be expecting more people to step up. Cyber civic society is, in the telecommunications world, represents itself through regulators. Okay, it's, some people say it's governments, but actually you look at someone like the FCC. FCC represents the citizens of the United States. IDA in Singapore represents the citizens of Singapore, right? So these are groups that represents the civic society. Telecommunications companies are issued licenses based off of civic society expectations. They put expectations on us. And with those expectations, right, we're required to do certain things, right? So this is where right now we're talking about voluntary code of practice, but as I mentioned, there are countries that are making this mandatory, right? And in the United States context, the hope is if we can do enough voluntary, we don't have to do mandatory, right? That's always the hope of commercial operators. A lot of this work is based off of this particular RFC, recommendations for botnets and ISPs. So this is one of your homework things here, is to actually read through this RFC, right? Posted on IETF, it's a good document on it, and a whole bunch of people contribute to it in the industry. There was a time, as I noted before, customers are not the problem now. There was a time where users and customers were blamed for doing dumb things on the net. And still, customers do dumb things on the net at times. But there's a lot of what the criminals do that you cannot, blame the customer. When they're using professional advertising techniques to get people to click on something, with something they post up on Facebook, which looks just like the thing that says, buy this new soap, or buy this new dishwasher, liquid, or something like that. It's the same sort of advertising techniques, It's like selling to kids and say, buy this cereal, right? That sort of human manipulation to get you to do something. The criminals use those same techniques. We can't just blame the user anymore. We can't blame the customer. At the same time, we can't sit there and not educate the customer. I mean, with my kids, as an example, my kids were being hit with all these commercials on TV, and, I always talked about them being brainwashed. I'm talking to a 2-year-old and said, oh, my daughter would say, I want to buy this cereal. Says, oh, you're being brainwashed. I said, what do you mean? And I explained to her what brainwashed is. It'd be funny, by the time she's 6, she understands that, the TV commercials are trying to manipulate her. And I would ask her, is it you who wants it, or is it the TV commercial who wants her? Now, that's me trying to educate my daughter so she is, able to push back against this sort of effect. That's an example of education, right? So education can work against this, but, it's going to be hard. Another slide out of the semantic report, how many people being victimized a day, that they came up with. Pick your numbers out there. If you're looking at your network and you're seeing, any sort of figures out there, you'll realize there's a lot of attempts to try to victimize people every day, right? And it's not in the thousands, it's in the millions when you total up across the world. So there's a lot out there, right? Crime victimization, it's pretty significant in different parts of the world, U.S. being one of the top of where it's being out there. Now, what we are trying to do here is disrupt the cycle. Typical, a botnet infection cycle follows a particular pattern where it's created, it gets activated, right? I start the replication process and spread it out into my network. The victimization happens. I start trying to say, now I'm on a computer, and start victimizing the computer with it. Then we discover it, okay? Then we go out there and we start remediating it. And there's creation all the time, right? So this is a typical cycle, right? In other words, what happens today is that anybody who starts doing stuff, we start taking care of the problem after the victimization has already happened. In other words, after the damage is already done. What we want to shoot for is, one, to get something where at least we're doing this. Because a lot of providers don't even do this, where you're doing the discovery and doing the remediation. And what we love to do is do this part, where it gets created, it gets activated, we discover it and disrupt the cycle. Okay? Because if you view this as a let's prevent the crime or let's prevent the infection, no matter public health or criminology methodology, you want to prevent the victimization part. You want to prevent the infection part. So if we can go out there and see the creation of these, see it being activated, and disrupt it right away, okay, then we're getting ahead of the game. So that's kind of like our goal. Now, how do we do that? Well, you got to take first steps with it. And the interesting thing is, there is out there to do it. So first thing is expectation. There's no one party can do all this on their own. So if you think that you as a service provider can say, I can run this solo and start doing this and build my own system, it doesn't work. You got to have partners. You got to have partners throughout the industry. And partners with your peers, partners with your vendors, partner with the operating system people, partners with the applications people, because we got application hits out there. So you're going to be working together in a community. All right? They can't solve the problem by themselves. You can't solve the problem by themselves. All right? So this is a teamwork sort of effort. All right? So it's not one party. You can't point fingers on one group. So those people out there says, oh, the service providers are at fault. No. We're all in this together. So, right? So that's the core thing of it. So expectations, right? So there's also no way to guarantee the remediation of all the botnets. Now, people say, eliminate all the botnets. There's no way you can guarantee you're going to clean them all up. I don't know how many people here have taken systems of your customers out and started doing cleanup operations, but I know all the time when I've done it, it's not one botnet, it's multiple botnets. And I take it to clean up one botnet, and then I find these others and get those samples, and we find botnets that we didn't even realize it was on the system, right? So that's normal. So right, so there's no way to guarantee the remediation of all botnets. Botnet removal is potentially a task requiring specialized skills, knowledge, right? So it's not also one of those things that you take DNS changer as an example. So we'll refer to that one because that's frequent. How do you clean up a user whose router got infected? Now, they weren't really infected. All that happened was the miscreant used a tool to go out there and configure the router's DNS to use their DNS. That's what they did. So how do you explain to, like, my mom who sits in Tennessee who's retired, and say, okay, Mom, let's reconfigure your router. And she'll go, what's a router? How do you do right-click, right? So part of the remediation process is you have to think through and say, I'm going to have a large number of my users who are not going to have the skill level to do complicated fixing, right? And some of these miscreants, like the DNS changer, they intentionally went into the routers knowing that I can get the whole house, but also it's going to be very difficult to clean up and remediate afterwards. Attempts to clean up may be, unsuccessful, right? So that's another factor with it, right? That, we've seen some of them out there, and you can easily see a evolutionary effect. If we go out there and we really push remediation, right? We get like service providers all over the world doing remediation with our customers. We find out our customers are infected, we work with them, remediate them. Then a logical step that a bad guy can do is says, okay, I'm going to make a self-destruct botnet. All right, so if you try to remove it, I will do damage to the system. So if I go out there and use an antivirus removal tool and try to clean it up, the system gets hurt. Which then you have a dilemma. It says, okay, how do I then clean it up now? Right? So we can easily see this happen because we've seen it with the ransomware activity going on right now because we got this big wave of ransomware activity going on, right? And there's self-destruct systems. And, also the botnet removal can affect, side effects, right? So this interesting thing is back in 2005, I was talking to the CTO of one of the big providers in Hong Kong, and we were talking about this issue of cleanup and botnet removal, and they had a botnet removal process. So back in 2005, they had a botnet removal process and what they would do. And it was interesting, he says, our number one recommendation when we find a customer who's infected is we call them up and tell them to go get a new PC. That was their number one. This is back in 2005. And it says, we're in Hong Kong. PCs are cheap. So we tell people go buy a new PC. It says, what did they do with the old PCs? It says, they repurpose it and put it out in the market. But then when they repurpose it and put it out in the market, they delete the operating system and load up a new operating system so it gets it fixed, right? And then when they buy the new PC, they usually buy the new operating system, which makes it a little bit better. So back in 2005, that was a number one remediation tool, is not to go out there and get antivirus. They say, go get a new box. Oh, the modem's broke. Go get a new modem. And I always go like, does that work? He says, well, it kind of works for us. So, that's an example of it. It's some people may go like, oh my goodness, I can see myself recommending my customer to go buy a new PC. What's going to be their reaction to that? So I don't think that's going to be able to work in all different markets out there. Detecting the botnet and the malware. We have a range of different ways of doing it. But probably the low-hanging fruit out there is start with some of the third-party notifications. There are public benefit groups out there, like Shadow Server and some other groups out there, who will give you, here's what they see on your network. And it doesn't cost you a dime. It costs you an email box. You set up an email box and they send it to you. Microsoft sends you this stuff now, right? So you can sign up with Microsoft. They will validate that you are a representative of the autonomous system number for which they send information to. So that way, people who don't have a right to get that information shouldn't get it. It's protecting, victimization data. But they will give you whole reports. And you just start with that, all right? So that's kind of like the low-hanging fruit. But then you can deploy other tools. You can deploy sinkholes and detectors and things like that and detect all this stuff. So seeing the activity, we've reached, as I said, one of the reasons I'm optimistic is we are seeing a lot of this activity. We can find these botnets pretty easily these days, okay? So why not tap into the system, either deploying your own telemetry or start with, some of these tools out there. So where to start? Here's a list of them out there, all right? And these are different places from Atlas, SAE, the Microsoft, Smart Network Data Services, SANS, DShield, still up and running. So they still provide reports up there. So each of these are groups that, if you talk with them, you go to these links and you talk with them, interact with them. I work for the service provider. This is my autonomous system number. Here's my network blocks. Can you send me reports? They will say, here's how we send you reports, and they'll say, here's what we see on your network. All right? What's that cost you? The correspondence to make it happen, and you get a whole bunch of really good telemetry that you can act upon and do things with. All right? So that gets you started with the visibility with it. Alerting the customers. Okay? Yes? So the question is, what's being reported with it? Most of them, they give you actionable materials, which means you have to have the source IP address, sometimes the destination IP address, the port numbers, right? Because you're going through NATs, so you need port numbers and timestamps. And that's most of them are giving you that sort of information. There are other groups out there that report data loss issues, right, which isn't on this list. So on this list that was given here, this is more like botnet, like this computer is infected with a botnet, so it's not so much content. But there are other groups out there that say, oh, here's data, here's usernames, passwords getting stolen. And you get a list from that. So there's other groups who specialize in those sort of things. Some of them is the same groups, but there are other groups out there. So it's the same principle. So when you look at data loss, start with these groups who are doing, public benefit work, right? And that informs you. I mean, yes, there are commercial operations out there you can do and collect this information, and there's tools you can deploy yourself to collect this information, but I've always been in the camp of where to start with the stuff that's free, right? And then contribute to that, feed that community, right? And then figure out what you need to do next. And then your decision of what to do next is more well-informed, tuned to your networking, you're not wasting money buying something you don't need or mismatches. Alerting the customers. Service providers, really basic stuff like can you print out or add an attachment in the bill you send to your customer? Something as basic of, the thing is, in a service provider world, you're talking to your customers. But sometimes you can't send an email message out to the customer. But do you have a way to do an email? So if you had a way to email to your customer, can you do that? I'm surprised, and I talked to a lot of customers that says, can you send an email to all your customers? They go, actually, we don't have a way to email all our customers. I go like, what? You don't? So it's a lot of it with the basics out there. So email, being able to do phones, web alerts. I've actually seen service providers had a phone tree. They will call and send a message to each of the customers and what they're tapping into is their sales tool, because they have a sales tool that calls up the customer. So what they do is do a profile on a sales tool, and they call the customer up and says, your computer's been violated. And what tool are they using? They're using the same tool they use for calling and trying to sell to the customer, right? So going through these different tools, you'll be amazed if you sit back and say, could we use these to do botnet alerts and alert the customer? And walk through as many of them as possible. Because you never know a botnet that could hit that could be causing damage, and you need to actually do something quicker than normal. There's certain botnets that you can say, well, I can do this in a reasonable amount of time. Others, you have to do this because it's a crisis. The walled garden systems, the web alerts, they work. There's different systems to do that. So if you know that customers have been violated, right? And this is kind of like where the civic society expectation is. If you see your neighbor's house getting broken into, do you have an obligation to call the police? And this is what happens. When your customer's getting violated, do you have an obligation? And what is the time frame with the obligation? If you see the computer getting violated, what to do? So tracking, it's find a tool to increase the loyalty in here. So it's interesting when you talk to some of the big providers who've been doing this for a number of years. Around 2004, 2005 is when a couple of the big providers actually deployed systems stealthily. It's interesting. You get some of them they're walking around here. Get some of these guys who were the early pioneers and find out what they did. It was a stealth operation. In other words, I was with a vendor at the time, and we built the system, deployed it, and they didn't tell their bosses, right? And they started using it, right? And they gained confidence with it. And then they started leaking it to the bosses. And then the bosses go like, oh, this is all right. And then they had enough at the time. The key thing they were looking for was this thing over here, customer loyalty and decreased churn. They were looking for evidence that they can show to their boss that doing this sort of remediation work increased customer loyalty and decreased the churn. Because they knew what their bosses would say. The bosses say, if we did this and we throw them into a quarantine that said they were infected, they'll get mad at us and they leave. Right? So they needed the data to show that that is not true. That actually you increase customer loyalty and you decrease the churn. Okay? So they did it stealthily, and then within 2 years it was a company-wide, everybody bragging about it. Here was a tool out there. So what we do know about the people who've been doing it for a while, and I highly encourage, they raise their hand. Basically, the first group that raised their hand that says we will comply with the FCC SISTRIC anti-botnet code of practice. Those first people who raised their hand were the ones who've been doing this for a while. And they will all talk to you privately. And MAAWG is a good place to go grab them and say, oh, yeah, you work for this company. Hey, you were one of the first ones at ABC. Let me talk about key factors. My boss is going to worry about customer loyalty and decreased churn. How do you know that? And then you start taking notes as private conversations. And they'll tell you that. They won't tell it public, They'll tell you private. That's what we're here at MAAWG for, right? So this alerting the customers does work out. Email notifications, some of the factors in there is they get spammed all the time. Well, how did I know this email is from you? What do I do, right? Here, click on this link. I mean, what is it? One of the big professional social media sites, I looked at phishing that came through, and it was a beautiful fish. I mean, it was like identical to what the company sent out. I mean, just straight out identical, and it took you to a drive-by, right? This is what you're competing with email notifications on botnets, right? We're at MAAWG. We know this problem. So how do you figure out a way to get around that? This is why not relying on email is important. Telephone call notifications, right? You can use your sales organization has a telephone call notification to outsource it. Looking at that, postal. You got a bill you send out. Work with your billing department. Say, can we put a notice into a certain group of customers? All right, here's a customer that just won't fix it. Maybe we put a notice in there. And maybe they won't fix it because they don't know because it's the kid's computer infected. So they're not getting any notifications. So something that's in a mail insert and says, we think there's devices in your house that are infected. The postal notification is also important because where we're moving to in the connected home. Right now we're talking about computers getting affected. Tablets, thermostats, refrigerators, air conditioners, power meters, right? Cameras, right? How do I notify a camera that it's infected? There's no pop-up you can send. There's no email you can send to it, right? So this tried and true, your bill, right? But then you have this changing too. So this nobody said this was easy. What is the billing department trying to do? They're trying to get everybody to go to electronic. So instead of sending paper, here's electronic, right? And I bet you there's somebody who says the electronic ones nobody look at, right? So then how do you get them to look at it? So this is interesting. This is why walled garden systems and whether it's DNS based or other mechanisms are probably the mechanism people use for a while, but you need walled garden systems that will work with you, in my personal opinion, that will work to identify that, okay, this is a phone that's infected, right? Or a tablet or a thermostat, right? Because if it's a thermostat, then there's no sense putting the thing into a walled garden. But then they have to identify another device in the house to say, hey, we think this device over here, which is a thermostat, because of the DNS profile, is infected. So it's not your computer that's infected, it's another device in the house. So you have to set up these notification systems where you're telling somebody about something else inside the house or within the network that's being infected. Instant message, maybe. SMSs. If you can get your customer's cell phone number, then send them an SMS. And in some countries that I'm working with, the primary mechanism is they don't have fixed line. I mean, they don't have a fixed line phone number in the house. It's all cell phones. So first thing they do is they send an SMS message out. Your computer's infected. And they can do that because they can basically hit that 90% of the time it's going to be a cell phone number given in the customer profile, so they send out an SMS. And it's pretty cheap for them to do that. Web browser notification, social media, these are tools here that if I send a browser notification or a social media, let people know on those things. So other notification factors, public access points. If you notify people, is it a Wi-Fi box, right? Because you're going to have people connected to Wi-Fi, public access, small businesses, companies. Shared IP addresses with NAT login, especially in small businesses. Law enforcement lessons can also help out, right? So in other words, when you craft up your message, you don't want to have a message that says, hey, you stupid user, that won't work. You want a message that says, like you're a victim. You've been victimized. How do I help you, right? And law enforcement is trained to do that sort of stuff. You have a question?
I use one of these techniques, notify the home that their IP address, date, and timestamp was on the shadow, that they're infected based on the shadow server report. And they have maybe 6 devices in the home. Only one is infected. And I'm wondering if you have any ideas about how to deal with that, because I may be messaging, the mom and it's the kid's computer is infected, that kind of thing.
How to message that? I think there are professionals out there who they make it an art to figure out how to correspond with people under stress, right? That's why I pointed out the law enforcement. They're not the only ones out there. People who do, because you talk to somebody who says, hey, because it's how you view them. I view them as, okay, your home's been violated, and they go, what do you mean about that? And they get all stressed out with that. And you're talking to somebody under stress, and you're trying to convince them to take some action with it.
Okay, yeah, I think that's interesting. I think my question is a little different. Is there anything we can do to help a customer who, if I contact them, they don't want to check 5 computers or, laptops and iPads. I don't know what to do for them. I mean, I can tell them they're infected, but I don't know. I have no idea which device it is.
Right. So when you like behind a net and you say, there's somebody in the house infected, how do you help them out? And they have no computer skills.
Well, and a lot of homes have Wi-Fi routers now, so a lot of people are netted out.
Yeah. And I don't have any particular advice other than walking them through, here's checks you can do. I mean, it's funny because I was kind of like the help desk guy for a DNS changer, and I got lots of those questions. How do I? Well, it says I'm infected. Facebook says I'm infected. Google says I'm infected, but I checked everything, and it looks everything's okay. And then I have to walk them through and says maybe it's your router, maybe it's this, and they go, what's that? Right. So I think that's why I say the 40-40-20 rule. It's still going to apply. You're going to have a whole bunch of customers that are going to be very easy to remediate, but that 20% is going to be the difficult one. And this is I've checked everything. So you segued right into this one here. I checked my phones, my tablets, my Xboxes, my TiVo, my printers, my furnace, my light controls. I checked everything. And you're still saying I'm infected with malware. How do I fix that problem? And this is going to be that's that 20%, and it'll become more difficult. There's more devices out there, and they say, okay, what's infected? What's the Xbox? Well, I don't look at my kid's Xbox, right? Then you got, okay, the wireless could be open. May not be my house, right? So some of the providers who've been doing this for a while, they'll tell you stories that says, oh, yeah, it wasn't anybody in their house, it was their neighbor's house. And the neighbor was using, unbeknownst to them, was using the hotspot. Because it wasn't a hotspot, but it became a community hotspot, right? So, how do I do that, right? Sort of work with it. Now, there are walled garden systems out there. There are case studies you can get of people who use open source tools. And a lot of the work that started in 2005 with some of the big providers here that you can talk to here was they started with open source tools. There wasn't any product or vendor out there with a solution. So when you talk to them what they started with open source technology, right? There are products out there now. So there are vendors out there who say, I'll sell you a solution, right? So you got people who've built their own tools, you got vendors out there with the solutions, but the walled garden systems do work to the extent of what they can work. So you can go out there and check with them. One of the key things that a lot of the early work showed was that you cannot just say, I'm going to unplug you. So even by 2005, the service providers who started to do this already knew that you can't just say, I'm going to unplug you, because it was already triple play. You had E911 requirements, you had voice systems, right? You had video. So you can't just say, oh, you're a bad customer, you're infected, I unplug you. So by 2005, we already knew that. So the people you talk to have been doing it for a while, they're already under the realm of saying, like, okay, this is critical. I can't just unplug a customer for being, being violated because, if they can't make a 911 call, that's life-threatening, right? So the walled garden systems are built with that E911 context, right? How do you notify with that? And we do a lot of walled gardens. I mean, you logged into MAAWG here, it's a walled garden. So people say like, oh, wow, we can't do walled gardens because X, Y, Z. Well, I mean, you just logged into the wireless system here, and it's a walled garden. You had to put in an SSID, and you had to put the username and password in. That's a walled garden, right? The technology is there. It's not, like I said before, that it's not a technological issue now. Now it's more of thinking through how you want to set it up. So, and then remediation, self-help, a lot of self-help out there, but there's also professional help and get a new computer or device. The professional help is a business opportunity. Talk to your product managers. There's several people who do this who from a, instead of talking to the customer and trying to spend hours on the phone with them, you kind of push it off to somebody who goes to the house. I mean, the interesting story back in 2005, my mom got her computer infected, and my brother and I are both geeks, and we went around, but my mom said, oh, it was all right. I was on the phone with my service provider for 10 hours, and they were so nice. They really helped me fix my computer and everything. We got it all fixed. I'd go like 10 hours on the phone, at $14 a month. They will never, that operator will never ever make any money off my mom for a long time, right? 10 hours on the phone, right? So sometimes you kind of, figuring out how to push off the support with it. There's things you could do with self-help, but a lot of times self-help is not going to really help the, people out there. Consequences and inaction. I think the consequences of inaction is government guidelines and regulation, which are already seeing a bunch. Market forces, customer churn, customers not liking what you're doing. Civil legal action, right? People can sue in this society. But I think the key thing in here is the insurance underwriters. The understated sort of thing going on is insurance underwriters are probably going to be in a position where they're going to force people to do things because they already do that in a capitalistic system, right? So that's one of the things we're going to see a lot of. Some of the homework I put on the wiki page, right? There's a bunch of links out there. I'll put more links out there because I'm sure a bunch of us will be talking afterwards and through the conference, so it's kind of like a live thing. Look forward to more correspondence with it for more links with it, so that's good.